understand how Rani Mukherjee in the movie Black felt when she was anticipating a snowfall, but to her utter disappointment it didn't. Neither you or me or any other person sitting in this entire room can understand the plight of a blind person, unless you are on a blind date. Contest here, fellow Toastmasters, and my dear wonderful guests. Today let me walk you through a tale of a young guy Nakul, a more than sweet girl Anvita, and the third wheel, that's me. It was late that night. I, with a bunch of my friends, were trying to figure out how HCl reacting with NaOH can help us become engineers someday. And then the phone rang. Nakul, always trying to get out of the world of chemistry, hurriedly picked it up, and someone in a sweet voice asked,
Can I talk to Rohit?
Nakul replied, Yes, this is Rohit. And the talks started. Nakul called me a few days later, and a brief talk with him told me that things with Anvita had moved far from can I talk to Rohit to actually knowing everything about each other. And before I could say anything, he said she proposed. Now, many of the elder people sitting here might think that kids these days love in a week. Really? God save India. But this is the same case with us also. It is not a very common occurrence, and there was a shock on my face, and Nakul's face that melted like an ice cream cone on a bright sunny day. But before he could reply anything, he arranged a date for him. He was smart enough. A date that could decide his fate. So we were pretty broke then, with maybe $100 in our pockets. We went to Indian Coffee House. Now when I say we, it was actually both of us that went on the date. Now we sat 10 minutes down the line, she entered. Now Nakul had never met this girl in his entire life, but as soon as she entered, he knew that this was his girl. Now let me take a break and describe some of the appearances of the characters of my story. Nakul was around 45-50 kgs, 5 foot 6 inches, while Anvita was of the same height, quite compatible. But she had a little more weight, almost twice as much as Nakul's was. My first reaction was to run away. But considering that it would have been very rude, we sat and ordered coffee for each of us. Meanwhile, the smarty pants Nakul just said, hey, and looked down as if he had seen a ghost. Meanwhile, I started interacting with Anvita, was kicking Nakul continuously so as to speak. I mean, these guys were talking for God knows how many hours for the past 10 days, and now there was dead silence. But then he did. And when he did, it was a disaster. You won't even realize that these were the actual first words that came out of his mouth. He asked, Anvita, do you do yoga? The expression that Anvita had on her face was priceless. Apparently Ramdev Baba and his yoga were the most happening thing back then. And the RJ was discussing this on local radio. My friend thought it was a brilliant idea to ask her that on the first date. As awkward as it was, I somehow managed to end the conversation. But who knew that this was not the end? The storm hadn't completely hit us. We got up with the feeling of save yourselves, run for your lives. Then when we heard Anvita calling us back, to my friend's dismal luck, Anvita brought her sister. And not just a sister, her husband, her kid, the whole damn family was there waiting to meet Nakul. And when Nakul looked at me at that moment, the pain in the poor guy's eyes told me that the storm had actually hit. Next morning, Nakul called. His shallow voice said it all. Even after the horrible date, Anvita was still expecting an answer. He just said, help me, and he hung up. The constant nagging by that girl went on and on and on. The only alternative Nakul had was getting rid of his phone number. He did, and finally he was a free man. He learned an important lesson though. A lesson that no textbook could provide. The phrase, love is blind, just works in movies. Now, at the end of every story, we expect a moral, a message that could enlighten our lives. Even if you go and see Chennai Express, you see there is a message for us all. It teaches us that if you work 5 days a week, day and night, and then you go out on a weekend, you spend 300 rupees per ticket and watch this movie, you don't have a life anymore. And it's high time you do something about it. Now, even my story has a moral. With the population of India soaring day by day, there are very good odds of finding a date out on the streets, in the colleges, in offices, in your small cubicles, maybe even schools. You follow the protocol. You look at a girl, you ogle. You tell your friend that this girl is going to be your sister-in-law someday. And then someday you go and try and talk to her. And she might actually forget a sandal that day, and she might actually agree to go out on a date with you. Then you plan the date. You follow the protocol, you follow the process. You follow the protocol, you follow the process, otherwise you can get escalated, and this time to an actual police officer. Thank you. Back to you.